My guest today is Tracee Stanley. Tracee is the founder of Empowered Life Circle and the author of this awesome new book on Yoga Nidra, Radiant Rest. Really cool book, definitely check it out. I'll leave links down below. This is the second in my series of interviews with experts in Yoga Nidra. So I've spoken with Elena Mironov. If you enjoyed this video, do go and check out my video with Elena and make sure to subscribe if you want to stay in the loop for my video with Charlie Morley. In this video, we go way beyond just the nuts and bolts of Yoga Nidra into talking about nature as a teacher, the kind of inherent poetry in these practices. Tracee shares with me some tips on fitting moments of rest and relaxation through your day, and also some insights into how deeper self-inquiry can actually lead to deeper relaxation. Tracee also led me in an unbelievably relaxing breath awareness practice, which I'll leave a link to at the end of this video. Obviously, if you're feeling stressed right now, definitely recommend doing that. I'll leave a link down below as well to that. If you enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like, and I will see you on the other side. Tracee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me to be here with you, Tom. I'm really happy to be here.
I just have to make you, uncomfortable first by lavishing you with praise for your new book, Radiant Rest, which came out from Shambhala a few months ago now. Just looking at it, it's such a beautiful book. It makes you feel calm just to look at it. You can see it's got that lovely shine to it, and it's filled with these illustrations that kind of remind me of classic yoga books, from the 70s and 80s. Just really, the aesthetic is awesome, and the book is incredibly well put together. It's a really up-to-date sort of book about Yoga Nidra, about various different schools are included, all of the neuroscience is included. It's really bang up to date, even talking about how you're using it in the coronavirus pandemic. It's still ongoing. But yeah, I just wanted to really lavish it with praise because it is a wonderful resource. What I'm so interested in Yoga Nidra is, obviously you're from this Himalayan tradition. My own first experience of Yoga Nidra was from Satchitananda type stuff with the balancing of opposites. And your book seems to go so much deeper than the Himalayan tradition or the books that I've read on that, with your own sort of poetic additions to it. And I wondered, you even include some of your poetry in here. I wondered, where did your interest in language come from? How did you end up having this poetic approach to this?
Wow, that's such a beautiful question. I think that when I began to really take my practice out of the yoga studio and into nature, the poetry just evolved. It wasn't, I have this practice of writing and doing free writing and journaling after practice as a way to capture kind of the essence and the fragrance and just the wisdom that comes from that deep silence. And more what I would notice, especially after being in nature and doing that practice, is that it wasn't like a journaling. It was really like a translating of where I was in that space. And it always came back with this poetry.
Very interesting. And you've touched on two things there that I really wanted to talk to you about. One of them was nature. And you have the idea in your book that's kind of sprinkled throughout before each practice, this idea of a nature amplification practice. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means and what the role of that is in your meditation practice?
Oh, yeah. So again, we are doing these practices, and many times, especially very early on in my kind of yoga learning and study, there were always images of a vast blue sky or a night sky or an eagle soaring or something in nature. And then the more I began to study, I started to realize that the rishis and the rishikas, who were the original seers of yoga, were practicing in nature. right? And that they were having these realizations of different realms of consciousness in nature. And so I was like, why are we not practicing outside? I don't understand. And then I started to learn about the sage Dattatreya, who was asked by a king, who are your gurus? Because he was this realized master that was roaming the forest. And he said, oh, I have 24 gurus. And all of my gurus are found in nature. So my guru is the water, my guru is the wind, my guru is the sun, the moon, the earth, all of these, the eagle, the squirrel, the bear. And so it really made me feel like I need to bring my practice out into nature. And I really want to be inspired by Dattatreya and really just acknowledging, first of all, who are the gurus that are even on my land where I live, right? And I just started to pay attention to what was happening around me. And I feel like once I started to do that, it also led me into a deeper self-guiding of my own practices as opposed to listening to recordings. And I just started to feel, I had one experience where I was practicing on the beach. And I decided that instead of laying on a blanket, I would dig myself into the sand. And so I used that as like, you could almost say like the ultimate props, right? Because if you're in sand, you can really create like this beautiful nest for yourself. And the experience that I had practicing Yoga Nidra on the beach, in the sand, feeling the vibration of the earth, and then feeling my vibration, and then eventually sensing that those two vibrations attuned to each other, and that my body just completely dissolved. It was such a transcendent experience. Not only that, but of also feeling and sensing the waves that were coming from the ocean that of course weren't touching me, but I could feel the vibration of the waves. And doing this practice where I was feeling and sensing prana as waves moving up and down the body, I was just like, okay, I can't be the only one. So I'm going to offer this as an offering to my students and people who study with me as a practice for them to go and practice in nature. And when they came back, everything that they said was like, this was the deepest practice I've ever had. These new realms opened up to me. These things stayed with me even in the dream state, right? After doing it for a number of days or weeks at a time. So I really felt that it was important, first of all, for us to get back out into nature and have a relationship with nature, because we are nature. And I feel like that's one of the things that you realize when you're practicing, that you are nature. All of these elements are within you. The universe that is outside is also inside. And it's really easy to intellectualize those things. Like when you read about it, especially the teachings of Tantra that are telling you that there's this inner universe. And it's like, okay, I get it. There's this inner universe and that can affect the outer universe. But until you really feel it, you don't really know it. And I think that practicing in nature allows you to have a little bit of that knowing.
Yeah, that is really, really deep. I love that idea of the inner nature and the outer nature coming into sort of vibrational alignment. That's amazing. And yeah, I suppose the second thing that you mentioned early on there was this idea of self-reflection and journaling, which I know I've seen it mentioned in books before, but this was really kind of a recommendation of yours to do this after almost every practice. I guess not if you're doing it before bed, but in general, if you're practicing this, to have this time of self-reflection afterwards where you do free writing. And I was hoping you'd tell me a little bit more about that. Is that because when we're in this state of Yoga Nidra, things are coming up for us that we need to sort of understand more deeply?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's twofold, and it comes from my own experience. My experience was that early on in learning the techniques of Yoga Nidra, a lot of times it was like you would do the practice and then you would just go to lunch, or you would get in the car to go to the airplane to leave the retreat. And I always felt that there was this residue that was twofold. Sometimes it was this deep state of bliss and peace that was suddenly interrupted because there wasn't enough time to kind of hold it. And I feel like that holding allows us to remember. And at the end of the day, these practices of yoga are practices of smriti. They're practices of self-remembrance that lead us to self-remembrance. And I felt that not having that time to be able to capture and remember was really something that needed to happen, at least for me, because I'm sure that there's people who have had these major epiphanies or inspirations while practicing yoga or meditation, and you kind of move on to your day and then it's lost, right? It's like all of a sudden you're like, well, wait, I had this really great, what happened to it? And so it's an opportunity to be able to capture that so that we remember it in a way that we are really holding it more in ourselves, more in our mind. And at the same time, Yoga Nidra is such a deep practice that we also have other kinds of revelations, whether they're memories or realizations of, negative thought constructs that we've been holding. And we need to process those. We need to have an opportunity to process. And so I think that it really is a way of remembering and a way of processing that to me is really important because it's really almost another way of translating what happened in the practice so that I can remember and hold on to it a little bit.
Yeah, back to that idea of translation. Yeah, I love it. And that's that. So it's almost in a sense a letting go by allowing these words onto the page. You're able to let go of some of them and become conscious of others.
Yeah. Exactly. And I would also say that sometimes it is good to do before bed, the journaling, because especially if you are someone who suffers from insomnia or the mind overworking, it's a way for you to release your thoughts on the paper to say, okay, here's where they're going to lay for now, and I can rest. And when I wake up in the morning, I can pick them back up if I decide to.
Yeah. And one thing that really clicked for me in your book versus other books I've read about Yoga Nidra was when you're talking about one really simple practice towards the end of the book. You talk about, is it 105 breaths? Counting down?
108 breaths.
108 breaths, yeah. And you earlier on in the book, you're talking about how Yoga Nidra is essentially the study of the shifts in consciousness. And when we're counting down our breaths from 108 or 27, we're able to actually notice a lot more deeply those shifts in consciousness based on where we are in the counting. Yeah, I don't really have a question about that. It's just like a moment for me. So I just thought that was really cool. But yeah, another area that you really shed light on for me was the ideas of Pratyahara and Dhyana. Could you say a little bit about those and how those two limbs of yoga relate to Yoga Nidra particularly?
Yeah. So, Yoga Nidra is, if we're talking about Yoga Nidra as a technique, right? Yoga Nidra is this process of deep relaxation, of being systematically guided into deep relaxation and consciously guided into deep sleep. And so that means that our awareness of the outer world kind of dissolves and we awaken to this inner world. But as we do that, we are weaving our awareness through the states that are waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and then moving towards this portal of what is called the fourth, or Turiya, which is said to be this void, this place of no thought, this place of complete non-doing. And it's a place that's said to be like peace beyond words. So it's really like an indescribable place. But it is a place that we really want to be able to rest in at the end of the day. We really want to be able to know that that's a possibility for all of us, right, in the practice. And so when we think about this idea of Yoga Nidra as a technique, Yoga Nidra is actually a Laya yoga practice. So the word Laya, or I should say Laya yoga, relates to the yoga of dissolution. And so in order for us to dissolve, it also means that it's a pratyahara practice. So, when I first learned about pratyahara, the definition that I received was, oh, it's the withdrawal of the senses. And then as I did more study, I got another, like an add-on to that definition, which was withdrawal of the senses so that we can reassimilate into our true nature. And so what's happening with Yoga Nidra, it's like the queen of pratyahara practices, right? It's asking you to use all of your senses and to withdraw them inward and to really then become awake to what's inside, right? And so pratyahara, if you've ever practiced Yoga Nidra, sometimes you may be asked to release the awareness of sound. Of course, when we're closing our eyes, we're releasing the awareness of sight. And you start to maybe feel the cloth on your skin and release that feeling and feel the earth holding you. And it's a process. So pratyahara is the main ingredient of Yoga Nidra. It's also, I feel like, the main ingredient of a lot of meditation practices. But we don't often talk about pratyahara. It's kind of like, it's not one of the limbs we talk about a lot.
Yeah, your description that's really lovely, and that's why it really stuck out to me in the book as well, because it's one of those things we kind of not gloss over, but skip past when we're learning about yoga, because it's so hard to describe. But it's almost like, rather than it being an absence of the physical senses, it's actually this presence of something deeper that we can't really describe. That's the sense I got anyway.
Yeah, it's true. And then the concentration, is that we are bringing awareness, right, to the certain parts of the body to try to relax them. There are other practices like people may know the 61 point practice, or Shavaratra, as it's called, the journey of the corpse, or the pilgrimage of the corpse. And that is where we bring awareness to these parts of the body that are associated with the marma points, right? And so the more that we bring awareness to these parts of the body, but we're at rest at the same time. So it's like these two things are happening. You talked about the pairs of opposites, right? But the mind is still involved in that stage. So that's really a stage of deep relaxation that allows us to then release and move into this place of meditation and then beyond meditation, because the Yoga Nidra, the state of Yoga Nidra, the state of consciousness. So now we're talking about Yoga Nidra not as the technique, but as the state of consciousness, is this place that is referred to as Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So Nirvikalpa is that place of no thought samadhi. And so it's beautiful because we can just allow ourselves to lie down and relax and still be practicing yoga that leads us to this eighth limb as well.
Yeah, and would we include the visualizations as dhyana? I suppose they're a form of concentration as well, where we're imagining.
Yeah,
the moon,
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I really loved all of that visualization in the book as well. I know that the moon is a big one in the Himalayan tradition of Yoga Nidra, which makes perfect sense because it's like a kind of light in the darkness of this thing in sleep that's actually consciousness. Maybe I'm just putting words into the mouth.
No, I love that. But the moon is also it's related to nectar, right? It's related to this deep nurturing. The goddess Yoga Nidra is related to the moon. So when Brahma was calling on Yoga Nidra to help wake up Vishnu, he was extolling all of these virtues of moon-like qualities, peaceful qualities, Somya-like qualities. And also the moon is related to the dreaming center, which is at the throat. So you might have noticed that there were a number of visualizations where you bring the awareness of the full bright moon to the throat center. That also is in some Buddhist traditions as well, that the moon is related to the throat center.
Yeah. Okay.
And it makes sense because it's night, right? It's
Yeah.
Yoga Nidra is like moving into the night.
One of the things that you said in the book that I did highlight because I thought it was awesome was you don't even have to like yoga.
It's true.
I wonder, do you think that, in a sense, I think this is much easier than something like mindfulness meditation, where people can get lost in the abstractness of trying to define it and knowing if they're doing it right and stuff like that. Do you think there's a chance for Yoga Nidra to sort of take over from where mindfulness is not necessarily less popular now, but it's kind of the people who are interested in that are interested in that? Do you think there's a different group of people who are going to be interested in Yoga Nidra?
Yes.
How do you see those two kind of things interacting?
Yeah, I mean, I see I've already started to see that is that people who have absolutely no interest in yoga, interest in meditation, but they do know that they are exhausted and they do know that they need deep rest and self-care, are very attracted to this practice because it's very accessible. It's accessible because it's done in a prone position where the body is completely and absolutely supremely supported in every way. And it allows you to touch into this place that is very easy to reach. This, it's not unusual that I would teach absolute beginners and they would have these transcendent experiences in Yoga Nidra. And I think that one of those things is because it's not asking you to sort of, release your thoughts or to let go of thinking. It's so systematic and so subtle that the guidance really allows you to just release. And at the same time, there's things like trauma and other things that people are holding that you can become aware of. And so if you have trauma, it's a good idea to work with someone who is trauma informed so they understand, what can happen in the practice. But at the same time, this practice is for everyone. I mean, I have students who are teaching this in the basements of churches, in rehab centers, in places where people are not going to do yoga asana. And maybe their bodies are not comfortable enough for them to sit in meditation with the spine perpendicular to the floor, but lying down is much more accessible to them. So I've already started to see a huge shift where it feels like this practice is moving beyond kind of the yoga community and has really reached into a community of people who are interested in healing themselves, however that is. And it doesn't need to have a spiritual component to it. Because at the end of the day, Yoga Nidra, one of the great gifts that you receive from the practice is feeling deeply rested, right? Because when we move into that deep sleep state, we are sometimes touching into the NREM sleep, which takes normally a number of hours for us to get to, right? And so people realize that, oh, I can do this practice and I can feel like I've slept for a couple of hours just in 20 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting that you mentioned about beginners and profound experiences, because I can really remember my first ever Yoga Nidra practice and coming out of it thinking, what just happened? It was on like a yoga foundation course that I did years and years ago, and I hadn't really anticipated the sort of meditative aspects of this yoga course. And it's interesting because looking back and reading these books about Yoga Nidra, the aim sounds almost impossible and quite grand, this idea that it's like a conscious sleep. But then that is pretty much what I remember describing it as when I first did it, this idea that I don't know if I was awake or asleep then, but I feel like I've just been asleep for 8 hours. And so, yeah, there's that ease of maybe having a beginner's mind for this. Do you have any tips on how we can maintain that? Really difficult one for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it's the same thing that happens in meditation practice, right? Is that we have a mystical experience and then we're like waiting for that mystical experience to happen again.
Yeah.
I think that there's something though about Yoga Nidra, especially when it is done consistently, that it's easier to release that expectation of an experience because Yoga Nidra really is asking you to partner with the unknown. It's really saying we're moving towards this portal of the void, which is absolutely unknown. And so you just have to release and allow, which I think feels different. Like the energy is a little bit more of inertia and letting go, as opposed to in meditation, because that spine is perpendicular to the floor. There's a little bit more activity and energy that I think happens. And also, I think the mind can be a little bit busier as well. So, yeah, I mean, Yoga Nidra, if people haven't tried it, they should definitely try it and see what it does for them, how they feel after practicing. Because I feel like people keep coming back to Yoga Nidra because it's really offering something every time, and it's very healing.
So it's more about the not trying to do it, just letting the words wash over you, not thinking
it's the
about
absolute non-doing.
Yeah.
And you get to be in these liminal spaces, which is kind of it sounded like what you were talking about, your experience. Is that normally we just kind of blow through these liminal spaces, right? That we don't pay attention to that hypnagogic space between waking and falling asleep, and from being asleep to waking. But Yoga Nidra allows you to hover in that space of liminality. And that dreamlike space is a space that there's so much there that's so rich so that's really the space where it's like, oh, I feel like I'm sleeping, but I'm not sleeping. I'm like aware, but my body might even be snoring. Right? My mind is asleep. My body's asleep, but there's awareness, and I am aware of awareness.
It's very cool. It's almost like casting a spell, because I'm like listening to your words. I mentioned to you before we started recording here, but that I'd just done 2, and I feel like pretty stoned, frankly, from like how relaxing your voice is. But it is almost like magical, really, that I don't have to do anything. I'm just listening to the words. They're coming over me. The natural sort of visualizations that you're suggesting just happen. I don't really have to try. And then I feel completely different. What happens next? Because you mentioned in the book this idea of doing it yourself, self-practice without recording. And I wonder, do you have any sort of tips on what that looks like? Or is it something that's really just if you're very advanced, or?
No, it's funny. I don't even believe that there's such a thing as advanced in this practice of yoga, right? Especially with Yoga Nidra, because it's really about non-doing. And as I said before, it's so common that people have these deep experiences without even knowing anything about yoga. And so with the self-guiding, my advice is to find a practice that you really love, that really resonates with you, and just do that practice every day, if possible, for like 60 to 90 days. And at some point, you'll know the steps. And the steps could be very simple, like just allowing yourself to release and relax on the earth, noticing your breath, going into diaphragmatic breathing, systematically doing a body scan where you relax your whole body from the tip of the toes to the top of the head back down to the tip of the toes. Once again, just noticing your breath and counting your breath backwards from 27, like we talked about earlier, and just being awake and aware. If you lose your place, you start back again at 27. And then just allow your body to release and allow yourself to rest in spacious awareness and guide yourself through that, remaining awake and aware the whole time. And I really feel like if people begin to self-guide after practicing Yoga Nidra with an audio recording for a little while, like I would say 60 to 90 days, you will have some interesting experiences that are deeper even than listening to a recording sometimes. And once you do that, then I would say have a mixture of I self-guide and I listen to a couple of recordings during the week. If you're going to do the practice or commit to the practice for maybe 4 or 5 times a week. And then it gives you a lot of flexibility, because when you only have 5 minutes, you can really allow yourself to rest in these practices by self-guiding yourself for 5 or 10 minutes.
You talk a little bit about something similar to that not similar to that, but I suppose it's applicable to the same groups of people, which is almost everyone now, which is people who don't have much time. And you dedicate a huge chapter in the book to this idea of the householder's flow. Do you call it householder's?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love that how you tried to make this, or you aim to make this so accessible to everyone who needs it the most, which is people with no time. Could you just give us a few tips maybe about for people who are householders, who have kids, who don't have time, or just working really, really hard?
Yeah.
How can we fit this into our lives more easily?
Yeah, I love that question, because it's really about a reframing. I think that we've, and I say this in the book, that we've been sold a little bit of a bag of goods, right? That a yoga practice, in order for it to be valid and for it to be good, has to be, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. And yoga is life, right? If you're committing and devoting to this practice, it's life. And so you find those little pockets of time, whether it's 3 minutes or 2 minutes throughout your day. And that can be very simple. That can be waking up and finding 2 minutes to do alternate nostril breathing in the morning. It can be watching the sunrise or watching the light of the morning change as you chant the Gayatri mantra, or you're just aware of the fact that the light is changing and you offer a blessing or a prayer for your day. You learn how to do what we just talked about, self-guiding, so that you can release and allow the body to relax, and maybe just do a body scan. And so I have a whole practice in there about how to do body scan. Maybe you just release and chant Om for 3 minutes, remembering the states of consciousness, because that sacred symbol and sound of Om is related to the waking, the dreaming, the deep sleep, and the Turiya. And that is a whole practice within itself that is said to allow you to understand the states of consciousness. And so those are all like these little things that take less than 5 minutes that you can weave through the day. And when you begin to do that, your awareness of space and time begins to shift, and your awareness of where you bring energy externally towards distraction and away from the inner world starts to become more amplified. So all of a sudden you pick up your phone and you're about to scroll for Instagram or something that's totally useless for you, really. And you say, oh, I can use this 3 minutes, this 5 minutes to rest. I can use these few minutes to chant. I can be breastfeeding my baby and I can still be chanting. I can be actually adding mantra into my food as I'm making food for my family. I can actually be watching my child fall asleep and imagining them moving through the states of consciousness as I watch their breath change. There's so many different things that we can do if we just embrace this as a life and not just a compartmentalized practice.
Have you always been this chilled out, Tracee? To ask a question that someone asked me recently, have you always been this calm and relaxed, or is this something that you've had to learn? Because I can hear in your voice the resonance of like someone who is calm and has some control over this state of relaxation. Is something you've had to learn in your own life?
That is a wonderful question. So I have pretty much been very even keel ever since I was a kid. But what I will say is the practice of yoga nidra, it establishes you in this place of rest, because there is a place inside all of us that is always at rest. That place is eternal. No one can take that experience away from you. And when you have a knowing of it, or you've touched it enough, I feel like it brings back this vibration into the waking world. And I feel like that might be what you're feeling, is that I've done enough rest where I have a little bit of a baseline of rest. That's not to say that I don't get excited or I don't get mad or, whatever the range of all the emotions that happen. But I feel like the real gift of yoga nidra is that it allows you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is a place within you that is always at rest. That place is radiant. It is beyond all circumstance. We can go back to the Yoga Sutras 136, and if people want to go back and read their translation, whatever their translation they have at home, or Google it, that's where we can really touch into. And I feel like that knowing is a power. That is a true power.
Tracee, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people go to get more resources from you? Can they study with you? How can we get more into our radiant rest?
Oh, thank you. So if you're interested in the book or the book club, you can go to radiantrest.com. If you're interested in being in community where I share deeper teachings monthly, you can go to empoweredlifecircle.com. And my regular website is Tracee with 2 yoga.com. So and they all intertwine. So if you go to one place, there'll be a portal to the next place. But yes, that's where I am. I do teach teachers how to teach yoga nidra. And so we have a cohort that's going to be starting next year in January. And then I also have a bridge program for people who are not yoga teachers, but who are interested in teaching yoga nidra, and they've never done a yoga teacher training. So we have like a weekend bridge program that just gives you all the information that you need to know from yoga, so that you can, and we have a lot of teachers and like psychotherapists and people like that who are not interested in being yoga teachers, but they want to teach yoga nidra.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracee.
Thank you, Tom. So nice to be here with you.
I really hope you enjoyed hearing what Tracee had to say. If you did, make sure to drop a like for this video and consider sharing it with someone who you think might benefit. I've left links down below to all of Tracee's websites and of course her new book, Radiant Rest. And don't forget to check out the awesome guided practice that she led me in. I feel like this is kind of turning into my job, just to have like private guided sessions with literally like the best yoga teachers in the world. I can't complain really. I'll leave a link to that around here. And while you're here, if you enjoy guided breathwork, definitely consider checking out my latest book, Draw Breath, The Art of Breathing. It won 2 awards for well-being, and it was a #1 bestseller in yoga here in the UK on Amazon for last Christmas. It teaches you basic breathwork and meditation skills by drawing in time with guided imagery. So it's super duper relaxing, and I definitely recommend you check that out. So I'll leave a link down below. And of course, if you are interested in Yoga Nidra, do check out my video with Elena Mironov and hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop for my video with Charlie Morley. That's enough waffle from me, and hopefully see you next time.